Toronto Maple Leafs forward Zach Hyman has been suspended for 2 games by NHL Player Safety for a hit against Bruins defenseman Charlie McAvoy this weekend. We are going to take a quick peek at the hit, take a look at the verbiage from NHL Player Safety, and I'll give you my thoughts coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, Toronto Maple Leafs forward Zach Hyman has been suspended for 2 games by NHL Player Safety for a hit against Bruins defenseman Charlie McAvoy from a game here a couple days ago against the Boston Bruins. Now, as usual, this affair between the Leafs and the Bruins was certainly physical. There was lots of hits, and I know there was hits on both sides for Bruins fans and Leafs fans both that they weren't pleased with, and this certainly wasn't the only hit in this game that drew some attention from a lot of the fans. That much we can say for sure. But Zach Hyman has been suspended for his hit on Charlie McAvoy. Now, in case you haven't had a chance to watch the actual hit itself, I'm going to show a very quick clip of it here, and you can have a look. Now, Zach Hyman was given a 5-minute major penalty for interference and a game misconduct, so he was ejected from the game. Now, of course, as McAvoy receives the puck behind the goal line, you can see Zach Hyman coming down the boards. McAvoy gets rid of the puck, and the hit certainly is very late. Now, at one point on McAvoy's angle, his numbers and his back basically are facing Hyman. He kind of moves a little bit. When Hyman comes in, you can certainly looks like a part of his elbow or his forearm kind of really gets him up high. So the verbiage from NHL Player Safety was that it's a very late, high hit, and they felt it had a predatory nature to it. So obviously they kind of felt that Zach Hyman was well aware of what he was doing, and this could have been avoided. Now, as I mentioned, this was a very chippy affair with lots of hits on both sides here that I think both fan bases probably weren't pleased with. Now, earlier in the game, Charlie McAvoy was involved with a hit on Mitch Marner that I know Leaf fans weren't pleased with as well. So certainly kind of comes across potentially as like a retaliatory type of deal later in the game here. Obviously, that type of thing happens all the time. Some hits kind of spill over game to game, period to period. As teams kind of try to stick together and stick up for their teammates, which is certainly very common practice, in the NHL for sure. Now, one of the big things that was kind of came into play here as well is that Zach Hyman does not have any history whatsoever of NHL suspensions. He's really not been any hot water during his time in the NHL. He's normally a very clean player and has no history of this nature. So obviously the NHL might have been harsher on him if he had a prior history at all, but in this case he wasn't, so it certainly helped his case. Now, my take on it is this: the hit certainly is very late. It's certainly avoidable, unnecessary, not required at all. I could do kind of agree with the NHL Player Safety to a degree, but my biggest beef here is not so much with the call on this one. It's just they seem to be so inconsistent. I honestly am a little bit surprised that he did get suspended, and I guess that they felt that this hit had more force and more predatory nature than some of the other hits that we've seen more recently, which didn't get supplementary discipline. So that's the part that I find as a fan very frustrating, is you can never predict now when NHL Player Safety is going to get involved and when the suspension is going to be, and even what the result will be if they are having a hearing. I mean, we've seen other big hits, like for example, we can look at Tom Wilson versus the New Jersey Devils not that long ago, and of course Ryan Reaves versus Tom Wilson shortly after that. And we had 2 cases where there was no suspensions, and they were basically called for the same type of deal, interference being the worst that we've seen out of either of those 2 hits. And I think there's certainly an argument to be made in both cases that they were, interference infractions as the hits were late. For sure. Now, this one was, I think, fair to say, later than either of the other hits for sure. But still, I mean, if you take a look at that Vegas-Washington game, Reaves and Wilson were going at each other all game. There were several encounters, several situations where they were laying hits on each other. And even though that Ryan Reaves hit on Wilson, the fact that Wilson was hurt really shouldn't have been factored in, and it wasn't, because Reaves did not injure him intentionally. Reaves got hit Wilson, his helmet flew off because it wasn't strapped on properly, and he ended up smacking his head, and now he has a concussion. But in that kind of situation, you can't really take the injury into account because that's not a direct result of what had happened. from the hit. But still, either way, when both of those situations came up, I really thought Wilson and Reeves would both be suspended. Now, I did not necessarily think they were going to be severe punishment. Even though Tom Wilson has quite the past history with NHL suspensions, this was a different type of hit, so I really didn't think they'd be able to refer to him as a repeat offender under the rule book. So therefore, I thought he might get, more of a slap on the wrist, maybe something more like Hyman got, just a couple games, or something along those lines. And in the Ryan Reeves situation, obviously that's what I kind of thought as well. I wouldn't have been shocked to see him get a 1 or 2 game ban for that hit on Tom Wilson, because it was late. It was, shoulder contact was the main point of contact. So there was no head contact, but it's just the fact that it was a late hit and it did end up, in a bad situation. But still, this is kind of similar in my opinion, even though it is a little bit later, I guess, if you take, really watch the puck leave and kind of count the seconds. It is really late. It is a bad hit, something that the NHL does not need. So by no means am I a fan of this hit. I do think Hyman deserves something, and the fact that he doesn't really have a prior history, I was kind of thinking 1 or 2 games would have been appropriate. However, I only think this is appropriate to suspend Hyman if you're going to suspend the others for the other hits that we just discussed as well. And based on those other ones not being anything happening, I would kind of surprised in a way that this one wasn't either. Now, I do feel bad for Charlie McAvoy. He just returned from a concussion, and to take a hit like this certainly does not bode well. I guess the good news that came out of this is for Charlie McAvoy, though, is that he was not injured, and he played the following game versus Ottawa. He seems to be okay. So I guess that is good news. But at the end of the day here, Zach Hyman is suspended and will miss the next 2 games. I mean, like I said, though, there were other hits just in this game alone that I know I've seen fans on the Boston side and Toronto side both not pleased about. Like, for example, the McAvoy hit on Marner. There was the Wagner hit on Riley. They're all a little bit different, and maybe to a degree they all could have been penalties, but I think this is the only one that kind of comes close to being a suspension. But again, my take on this is that if you're going to suspend Hyman, then you need to suspend Wilson and Reeves for their actions, because there really wasn't any worse in my opinion. There was no injury on the play. So again, like I've stated on many other occasions, I do support the mandate of NHL player safety, and the reasons why they're there are certainly justified to keep the players safe and to suspend players when it's justified. It just seems, in my opinion, that at times they are terribly inconsistent. I know last year I had many situations I discussed on this channel when I was just, could not understand why they chose to suspend or not suspend. It just seems to be no rhyme or reason to it. It can be difficult for fans to understand. It does seem like they are inconsistent at times. Like I said, where we've seen some other situations lately that were not, given any extra discipline. I was a little surprised that we saw it on Hyman. But of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments down below. Do you think Zach Hyman should have been suspended? Do you think the NHL Player Safety Department's been inconsistent with their calls? And not only with the Hyman call, but with the other big hits we've seen recently, like Reeves, Wilson, etc. Leave me your comments down below, and we can continue the conversation regarding NHL Player Safety's recent decisions. If you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up before you go. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.